Hello. So in the last video, I talked about and explained Gandhi's essay, The Practice of Satyagraha. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how MLK was influenced by Gandhi, and specifically how MLK explained what nonviolence is through his essay, Letter from Birmingham Jail. So even though Gandhi and MLK were coming from different religious backgrounds, they still really believed in this idea of the power of nonviolence. So Gandhi was coming from a Hindu and Jainist perspective, whereas MLK was coming from a Christian perspective. But at the same time, right, they both believed that nonviolence was the ethical way of existing and was an ethical way of responding to oppression. So even though the context for their oppression was different, they were in different countries and different times, right? I think the fact that they both embraced nonviolence and that nonviolence was used to achieve their goals, even though it was really painful and a lot of people didn't support it at first, definitely speaks to the power of nonviolence. So the purpose of Letter from Birmingham Jail is to basically explain civil disobedience in a very concrete way to a wider audience so people can really understand it and think about how they can be nonviolent and apply it to their own lives. So it's basically an ethical call to action to say, hey, please everyone wake up and understand the power of nonviolence and understand the urgency of the situation for civil rights, for the fact that Black individuals in the US have and continue to be oppressed through segregation, specifically back in the 1950s and prior to that. But at the same time, there's still a lot of issues and a lot of problems that we're still grappling with in our present day. So reading this can definitely be emotional, but MLK's kind of powerful call to action at the beginning is our interconnectivity. And he says that we're all interrelated, and injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we can't just sit idly and just be kind of passive and think, oh, well, what's happening in Florida or Alabama or wherever, or England has nothing to do with me, right? No, of course it has something to do with us. We're all caught up in this, as MLK says, in this inescapable network of mutuality. So our actions do impact one another, and whatever affects one affects others indirectly. So oppression and violence is like a cancer, it spreads. So even if we think something isn't going to impact us right now, it will eventually impact us and it will spread. Just thinking about racism, thinking about Nazi Germany, thinking about colonialism, right? It might start off as something smaller, but then it continues to spread and gain more power. So we have to respond to injustice anywhere because it will spread, and we are part of this human community that impacts one another through our interconnectivity. So what are some of the steps in order to become nonviolent? MLK kind of creates a list of different steps and tasks that we have to engage in order to really understand and translate these ideas into action. And he says you have to collect facts, you have to understand the process. It's going to be challenging, it's going to be difficult. We have to negotiate with others, we have to negotiate with ourselves. We have to, I think this is the hardest part, but we have to engage in a process of self-purification where we have to cleanse ourselves and those negative mean thoughts that we have, and that reactionary way of existing. When someone hurts us, we want to hurt them back, and we have to kind of go beyond that idea of revenge and really translate this process of negotiation into direct action. So of course, he says that nonviolence is a process of direct action that establishes attention and creates change, but the community has to kind of negotiate and confront the issue. It's not just going to randomly change without any action. And I think this is also another parallel between MLK and Gandhi, because you're not being passive, right? You're still doing things, right? It's just not in a violent way. And of course, MLK says this is a urgent crisis-packed situation, so there has to be some sort of immediate action and negotiation process, but we have to really cleanse ourselves, cleanse our thoughts, cleanse our speech in order to act nonviolently. And because of the way oppression works, he says that freedom has to be demanded from the oppressor. The oppressor's never going to give it to you, so you have to fight for it, but in a nonviolent way. So how does direct action work, right? This is where both Gandhi and MLK, right, talk about that idea of a just versus unjust law. So Gandhi talked about it in terms of a civil resistor versus criminal resistor, and how the civil resistor sometimes can break the law if it's unjust. MLK then breaks it down into understanding what makes a law just versus unjust. And he says that a just law is a human-made code that coheres with the moral law of God. He was very religious, and he talks about how a just law benefits the human being. It celebrates and can uplift the human being, whereas an unjust law degrades the human being, and it's the imposition that a majority imposes upon a numerical minority. And so it damages the human personality, it oppresses us. So, for example, segregation violates the human personality and is oppressive. So it is permissible to break these unjust laws. Not every law is just. And if you're fighting for rights, if you're fighting for something in a nonviolent way, it's still permissible to break certain laws that are unjust. Just because something is a law doesn't make it inherently just. So, what have been some of the responses during the time period that he was writing in to nonviolent resistance, to direct action? And this is where he talks about the frustration he feels with the white moderate, who is on their side. They have goodwill. They believe in the cause of, civil rights and nonviolence, but they believe that it's just too early, or it's not the right time to shake things up, and that order is more important than justice, because nonviolent direct action is going to cause chaos and change. And so the white moderate believes that, hey, you need to wait. This isn't the right time. Whereas MLK is saying, no, this is justice, and human rights are urgent, and there's never going to be an ideal time. But what's kind of interesting is that the white moderate for MLK is more frustrating than the KKK member, because they have the potential to be on their side. They have the potential to help be part of this, movement towards justice, but they have a shallow understanding of the situation, versus the KKK, who has an absolute misunderstanding of the situation. So it's just a much more frustrating situation for him than the obvious rejection from a racist. And it's frustrating when someone doesn't really understand the urgency of your struggle. But he says, in order to make democracy a reality, you have to be willing to sacrifice and fight for it in a nonviolent way. Because through nonviolence, it's a healthy channeling of discontent. It's that controlled use of the will. You're still responding, but you're doing it in a way that is constructive here. And of course, MLK was religious, so he believed that God is on their side, kind of that idea of satyagraha, with having truth on your side. So yes, it's going to be difficult. It's going to require a lot of pain and self and sacrifice and changes, but at the same time, it's worth it for justice. There's never going to be an ideal time. So I think it's really interesting looking and analyzing this essay within our contemporary times with respect to the use of violence and nonviolence, or the potential that we have for social change, since there's still, a lot of problems and a lot of oppression in our society.